Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. It was a summer Saturday in Atlanta. The sun was slowly setting onto the hot asphalt of the residential neighborhood of Buckhead, enveloping the facades of the Victorian houses in an almost unreal golden light. Shadows lengthened on the immaculately manicured lawns, and the steady song of the cicadas mingled with the discreet breath of the automatic sprinklers spinning in rhythm. The air was heavy but soft, carrying that silent promise of a quiet end to the day, almost suspended in time. The streets were quiet, almost empty, except for a few children on scooters and couples slowly walking their dogs. The atmosphere was like a bubble protected from the hustle and bustle outside, a peaceful setting, almost too perfect. It was in this apparent serenity that a black woman advanced, Naomi Parker, 38 years old, elegant, poised, her arms laden with brown paper bags filled with fresh fruit, artisan bread, and aromatic herbs. Each gesture was measured, fluid. Her steps clicked softly on the clean sidewalk, punctuated by the light scraping of her leather sandals. Naomi was known in the neighborhood. Not for her exuberance, she was discreet, but for this quiet presence, that natural grace that commanded respect without ever demanding it. A professor of African American history at Spelman College, she was admired for her passion for sharing with her students the forgotten stories of their ancestors, the invisible struggles, the silent victories. She wore a simple but impeccable sky-blue linen dress that day, which rippled gently in the breeze. Her braids were pulled back in a low bun, and her sunglasses hid alert eyes, curious about the world but marked by a certain fatigue. Her gaze briefly swept the street. She breathed deeply, savoring the end of a busy day. She was already thinking about dinner, a Haitian dish she'd promised to try for the first time, in homage to a student who'd shared one of her grandmother's recipes with her. She smiled to herself at the thought, carefree, sheltered. As she prepared to open the door of her white Tesla Model X, Naomi felt the air vibrate behind her, as if the atmosphere had been suddenly pierced. The roar of an engine shattered the calm. A black police SUV, marked Atlanta Police Department, appears at full speed and braked sharply a few meters away from her with a shrill screech of tires. Her heart leaped. She turned around slowly, her brows furrowed, but not panicking. She had nothing to reproach herself for. "Hey, you!" Away from the vehicle. "Hands up," shouted an authoritative voice. The words, charged with aggression, cut through the air like a blade. Naomi froze, instantly. Her fingers, which were still touching the door, slowly curled. She raised her hands hesitantly, a bag of groceries still hanging from her left wrist. Her gaze, behind her sunglasses, sought to understand. Her heartbeat quickened, her breath became shorter. She swallowed with difficulty. "What the? I'm home. This is my car." His voice, initially calm, betrayed a growing disbelief. But his words seemed to bounce off a wall of indifference. They had no weight. Two police officers had just gotten out of the SUV. The first, Officer Kirkland, white, in his 40s, his face tense from years of tension and undigested suspicions, put his hand directly on his weapon, ready to draw. His gaze fixed on Naomi not as a citizen, but as a potential threat. The second, a young black officer named Reeves, seemed less sure of himself. He looked briefly at Naomi, then at the vehicle, then at the neighborhood. Something in his gaze said, "It doesn't stick." But he didn't have time to open his mouth completely. "She matches the description. Same type of car. Black woman, alone, in a light-colored dress," Kirkland said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Reeves hesitated. His gaze slid back to Naomi, who kept her arms raised, her brows furrowed, her chest rising and falling faster and faster. "Maybe we should just check before we." More Kirkland was already no longer listening. He had rushed towards Naomi, one hand on her shoulder, the other violently pulling her arm. In an instant, she was pressed against the burning side of the Tesla, the hot metal biting into her skin through the thin fabric of her dress. The impact briefly knocked the wind out of her. Her bag slipped from her hands, the apples rolled on the asphalt drawing absurd circles in the now chaotic scene. A bottle of balsamic vinegar shattered, leaving a dark, sticky puddle mingling with the glass shavings and crushed basil stems. "You have the right to remain silent," Kirkland began, automatically reciting the Miranda warning as he handcuffed her. Naomi could hardly hear anything anymore. The sound had become distorted, as if she were watching the scene from outside her own body. A voice in her head kept repeating, "This is a mistake. They'll realize it. I'm home. I'm home." Around them, neighbors were starting to come out onto their porches. Some watched in silence. Others were already filming with their phones. A white woman, visibly shocked, cried out, "But, it's Naomi Parker. She lives here. What are you doing?" But the police did not react. The weight of habit, that ought never be questioned, kept them in their tunnel of certainty. Naomi's face, pressed against the smoked window of her own car, reflected a brutal and absurd injustice. This neighborhood, this house, this car, all of it was hers. Yet, in a matter of seconds, she was nothing more than a handcuffed black body in the middle of his own decor. And despite all his education, his diplomas, his calm, nothing had prepared her for this precise moment, the one where his existence could be erased in a second, replaced by a suspicious silhouette, simply because of his skin color. The tone rises. The air seems to thicken. Voices begin to rise from the neighborhood. An elderly woman, in a dressing gown, runs up, holding her phone at arm's length. "I'm filming everything. I know her, she's lived here for years. Let her go." More neighbors appear, some on their porches, others in their driveways. Murmurs of dismay spread like wildfire. But Kirkland remains deaf. In his head, authority prevails over doubt. The image he has created of Naomi, a suspect, a possible thief, a threat, overwhelms anything he might have heard or seen. The truth weighs nothing against the narrative he has already decided. Naomi, still pressed against the car, maintains an almost supernatural calm, but her eyes shine with an inner fire. She speaks calmly, firmly, without pleading. "My name is Naomi Parker. It's my vehicle. And home. My papers are in my bag. I can show them to you." She tries to turn to indicate her bag, but as soon as she moves her hand, a nervous Kirkland interprets it as a threat. "Don't move," he yells, as if she were holding an invisible weapon. And suddenly, with a brutal gesture, he grabs her by the shoulder and violently pulls her back. She stumbles, her knee hitting the rear wheel. His sunglasses fall to the ground, the glasses cracking silently. The humiliation is total. He slaps the handcuffs on her with the coldness of an automaton. The metal bites into the thin skin of her wrists. The crowd begins to protest louder, shouts erupt. "She didn't do anything. You're making a mistake." But Kirkland, sweating and tense, can't hear anything anymore. In his head, he has to get a grip on the situation. No matter what. Naomi sits up as best she can. She doesn't cry. She doesn't scream. She looks straight ahead, her face tense but dignified. A silent tear rolls down her cheek. It's not for her. It's for them, for their ignorance, their fear, their blindness. Kirkland pushes her toward the SUV. He opens the back door, ready to let her in. And it is at this moment that the dull roar of another vehicle fends air. A second police SUV speeds around the corner. It hasn't activated its siren, but the red and blue flashing lights flash urgently. He brakes sharply, a few steps from the stage. The front door opens in a sharp snap, almost theatrical. A man steps out with determination. Impeccably tailored dark suit, badge plastered on his belt, icy gaze. He walks with a quick, direct step, each step striking the asphalt like a verdict. Captain Elijah Parker, Deputy Chief of the Atlanta Police Department. And Naomi's husband. Kirkland watches the man approach, at first without reacting. He simply perceives a determined silhouette, with square shoulders, in a dark suit, walking with a precise, methodical step, without haste but without hesitation. Silence falls over the stage like a lid. The tension is almost physical, like a static charge in the air. Kirkland, still at Naomi's side, begins to feel Adolphe's discomfort. Something in the way the neighbors part, in the whispers that fall silent, in the eyes that fix on the approaching man, makes him understand that he is no longer in control. The man stops 2 meters away. He doesn't shout. He doesn't run. He doesn't threaten. He stops. And slowly, with a gesture that seems to weigh a ton, he slips his hand into his inside pocket. The gesture is solemn, measured, like a sentence that one is about to pronounce. He takes out a badge d'or massif, polished, heavy, which captures the light of twilight. He does not brandish it like a weapon, but the tens, calmly, at eye level. He doesn't say anything. No words. No shouts. No orders. Just CE badge, held between 2 fingers, like an implacable mirror. Kirkland's gaze falls on it. He reads. Captain Elijah J. Parker. Internal Affairs Division, Atlanta PD. A frozen discharge crosses his body. He takes a step back, as if he had just received an invisible blow. His mouth opens slightly, without making a sound. Beside him, young Officer Reeves blanched, her lips tremble slightly. He looks away, confused, uncomfortable, realizing the full extent of what they have just done. Elijah, still impassive, finally looks up at Kirkland. His gaze is like tempered steel, not an angry look. Not even an authoritative look. None. It is the look of a broken man. Of a husband who sees his wife humiliated by one of his own. He doesn't look at Kirkland like a superior looks at a subordinate. He looks at him as a man looks at a traitor. And behind him, still handcuffed, her wrists cut by the metal, Naomi slowly raises her head. Her eyes meet her husband's. She sees the badge. She sees his name. She sees the stiffness in his jaw, the anger pent up in every muscle of his face, the breath he holds to keep from exploding. And at that moment, something inside her is cracking. She trembles, but no fear. It is a deeper, more intimate pain, a mixture of fatigue, disillusionment, inner loneliness. This badge she sees shining in her husband's hands, she's seen it so many times. On their hall table. In the car. In their bedroom. She looked at it with pride, with respect. It was a symbol of justice, commitment, sacrifice. More today, this same badge became a silent witness to his humiliation. She gently closes her eyes. A single tear slides down her cheek. Not a tear of rage. One tear too many. She doesn't speak. She doesn't scream. She doesn't beg. She looks at him, for a long time. Intensely. And in that look, she says everything. The shock. The humiliation. The incomprehension. The cruel irony of being handcuffed by the same system her husband swore to defend. And that silent, heartbreaking question, how many other women like me, without a badge, have not had a miracle? It's a silence intolerable. A screaming silence. Kirkland doesn't dare move anymore. Reeves looks down. The neighbors, stunned, don't even dare film anymore. At this very moment, the gold badge no longer shines like a badge of pride. He became the reflection of a system that has just betrayed itself. Elijah slowly approaches Naomi, his heart pounding, his jaw clenched. He takes off his black leather gloves with a precise gesture, then take out the key to the handcuffs tied to his wife's wrists. His hand trembles slightly, not with anger, but with an unbearable mixture of shame, suppressed rage, and inner pain. He kneels before her, without a word, and inserts the key into the small hole in the lock. The metallic click sounded in the absolute silence. The handcuffs open and fall to the floor with a dull clink. Elijah looks up at her, slowly, as if afraid of encountering a wall he will no longer be able to cross. His eyes, usually so sure, are now filled with a silent sadness. He wants to say something, to make amends, to explain, but he knows there are no words powerful enough to erase what just happened. Naomi doesn't move, she keeps her arms crossed against her, absent-mindedly rubbing her metal-marked wrists. She stares into the distance, her jaw clenched. She avoids his gaze. Not out of fear. Not out of weakness, but because something inside her has just broken. A silent thread between trust and protection. She, the wife of a police captain, the wife of an honest man, believed she was safe. That at least she would never experience what other black women had experienced. But that day, her husband's badge didn't prevent the injustice. It only stopped it at the last second. It is this truth that drives her away from him. It is this emptiness, this chasm, this growing gap between them that weighs heavier than the handcuffs themselves. Elijah stands up. He turns to Officer Kirkland, still frozen, his gaze empty, his features tense. He tries to justify himself, to stammer, to regain some semblance of control. But Elijah leaves him no escape. "You just handcuffed my wife. In front of our house," he said in a calm, collected voice, but cold as a blade. He pauses, then takes a step forward, his gaze turning sharp. "Without verification. Without valid reason. Without listening, you acted on a stereotype. You saw a black woman near a luxury car, and your first instinct was aggression. You triggered, through your haste and prejudice, a warning signal at all levels of the hierarchical chain." Kirkland lit de Balbutier. "Captain, I followed protocol," she matched the description, But Elijah is already not listening to him anymore. He slowly takes out his phone. Dials a number he knows by heart. "Chief, this is Captain Parker. I just interrupted an unjustified arrest in front of my own home. I ask the immediate opening of an internal investigation, as well as the Officer Kirkland suspended, pending the conclusions." He hangs up. The phone slides into his pocket. Around them, no one speaks anymore. The neighbors are still there, but silent. The flashing lights are still flashing, projecting blue and red flashes onto their faces like an unreal scene. Back in the house, Naomi moves slowly, as if in a trance. She takes off her shoes with a mechanical gesture, enters the living room, and drops off her bags without a word. She sits on the sofa, legs crossed, hands clasped, eyes lost somewhere between the walls. Elijah enters a few minutes later. He closes the door. The click of the lock seems to resonate like a sentence. He looks at her. She doesn't turn her head. He sits down opposite her. The seconds stretch by, heavy. Finally, he whispers, his voice veiled, almost broken. "I'm sorry." Naomi remains motionless for a few more seconds. Then she looks at him. Slowly. Not with hatred. But with an immense fatigue in the eyes. An old fatigue. A fatigue of existing, of explaining, of always having to justify oneself. She finally speaks. "You know what's worse, Elijah? It wasn't that they arrested me. It wasn't even that they slammed me against the car in front of my neighbors. It was that I saw in their eyes that they didn't see me. Not as a woman. Not as a citizen. Not as a person. Just a black silhouette." She looks down, then slowly back up, hammering her words in like nails. "And what I saw in their eyes, I've already seen it in yours, when you come home tired. When you talk about those problem neighborhoods. When you tell me that some people are exaggerating. When you forget that, even though I'm your wife, I am also that black woman that the police arrest." A silence heavier than all the speeches falls over the room. Elijah cashes in. He understands. Finally. It's not just about pointing out a colleague's mistake. It is about facing up to the system that he embodies, the silences that he has accepted, the looks that he has not questioned. And moreover, he understands that its mission is not only to enforce the law, or to intervene after the disaster. His mission now is to rebuild trust. Connection. Home. One's own integrity. At home. And in his city. A few weeks later, the city of Atlanta hosted exceptional forum on police reform, organized by the municipal department and several social justice associations. The event was held in the historic auditorium of the Civic Center, a place steeped in memory, often used for major public debates. The building was full, every seat occupied, law enforcement officials, local elected officials, activists, students, survivors of police abuse. All gathered under one roof. With hope. With tension. With expectations. On stage, a simple lectern, a microphone, and behind it, a screen simply projecting these words. Repair, reform, rebuild. Among the guests, the name Naomi Parker had surprised. She wasn't a politician, a police chief, or a professional activist. But her story, filmed by several neighbors and going viral within days, had shocked public opinion. Not because she screamed, but because she had remained calm, dignified. And because, despite everything, she was the wife of a high-ranking police officer. This contradiction had struck. This embodied paradox became an anchor point for the discussion. And Naomi, although reluctant at first, had agreed to speak, not to tell his story, but to go further. That evening she went on stage in a sober black dress, hair pulled back, no heavy makeup. Just his voice. His truth. His presence. In the room, in the third row, sitting among uniformed officers and elected officials in ties, stood Captain Elijah Parker. Midnight blue suit, white shirt, no decorations on the chest, silent. Present. His gaze fixed on her. Tonight, he was neither deputy leader nor authority figure. He was a man who listens. A husband. A man who wants to understand. Naomi approached the microphone. She paused, silence fell immediately. She began in a calm, almost gentle voice. When I went on stage today, many people asked me if I was here as a victim. Others, as a witness. Some even, as the wife of a police captain. But I am here first and foremost as a Black American citizen. As a woman. As a potential mother. As a teacher. As a human being. She paused. Her gaze swept the room. What I experienced that day, in my own neighborhood, in front of my own house, was not an isolated incident. It was the extension of a culture, of a biased view, of a destructive automatism. I don't want excuses. I'm not looking for revenge. I want that we relearn how to look. To listen. To see. In the audience, some look down. Others nod. She inhales slowly. Then continues. I didn't scream that day. But in my silence, I carried the cries of thousands of others, women, men, teenagers, humiliated, beaten, or killed, simply for being seen as suspicious. Because they were Black. Because they were brown. Because they weren't recognized as human first. Then comes the moment. The one she'd rehearsed on her own, dozens of times. The one she wasn't sure she had the strength to say. And yet. She looks up, straight ahead. My husband wears a badge. This badge, one evening, made me cry. Not because it hurt me, but because the system he represents has forgotten me, because I was no longer his wife, but a potential target. That evening, he saw, like me, the wall, ***. She looks at Elijah for a moment. Their eyes meet. He doesn't run away. She continues. But this badge, I don't want to hate him. I don't want it to remain a symbol of fear. I want it to be the symbol of justice. Of transformation. Of courage, not a weapon. A commitment. And it starts at home in the way a man looks at his wife. In the way a father speaks to his children. In the choices a police officer makes when no one is looking. Silence in the room. Deep. Total. She concludes. Reforming the police is not about tearing down a system. It is treat it. Decontaminate it, and this can only be done if those who still believe in it, like my husband, like all of you here, have the courage to question him. To repair it. And to make it a real protection tool, for all. She steps away from the microphone. Applause. First timid. Then loud. Then standing. Some cry. Others, like Elijah, stand without saying a word, tears in their eyes, their hearts filled with things they will never know how to say.